All right. Hello. Hello, everyone. It's time for our talk. My name is Rodrigo. This is Telis, and our talk is called Knowledge Legacy, the issue of passing the baton. So let's start with an assumption here. Let's say that you've been watching the same recipe online in those tasty, taste-made social media forever, like, I don't know, in your Facebook feed, in your Instagram feed, and you are just craving to have this awesome mac and cheese dish here. So one day after arriving from work, you just decide, okay, I'm gonna cook it. It's my time to have it. So you get the recipe, you get everything that you need to cook it, all the ingredients, you organize all the kitchen, all the utensils, and you turn the oven on, or whatever you need to do, and you just start cooking, right? You just start following the recipe, step by step. And out of the blue, you receive a notification on your phone saying, dinner with boss, whatever your boss name is, in 10 minutes. And you look, okay, I gotta go, I cannot eat my mac and cheese today. So you just leave, and you turn off the oven or anything else that you had on, and you leave the apartment or your place. And suppose that after a while, after some minutes, you have a roommate or a significant other that arrives at home, and they are very hungry. They just want to have dinner. So they basically find your mess there. You didn't clean things up. You didn't clean things up before leaving, and they actually have 4 options. Besides being angry at you, they have these 4 options. The first one is clean up a mess and start to cook something from scratch, right? They can leave a mess there to have you clean it and order something to eat. They can try to cook something from scratch around your mess, but it's kind of challenging, right? And they can also try to finish a recipe. But how can they do that, right? Because you are the only person that knows where you stopped. Let's say that even had printed the recipe and left in the table, I don't know. But how are they going to know in which step you stopped, right? It's not like you cross it out each step that you completed. So at this point, I believe all of you are asking, okay, why he's talking about mac and cheese recipes, whatever. So the problem in this example is just like software, okay? The kitchen is just any software project. The utensils ingredients are just like the code used in the software project. And the recipe is basically a sequence of steps. So whenever you are implementing a new feature, you have this sequence of steps that you need to follow as well, right? And this arises because of the following issue. Who's here is familiar with the bus, truck driver, not driver, but the factor, right? For those who aren't familiar with it, it's basically in any project that you have in any company, the people that are part of the project, you may have someone that is so essential that if this person leaves the project for any reason, the project is doomed. The project is going to fail. And this actually is easier to deal with a private company because you have managers and you have people that are responsible for the project, and they need to be watching for those kind of people, right? The single point of failures. They need to avoid that. So in private companies, you are actually able to come up with mentoring programs inside, some sharing strategies, whatever. But this is not true in open source. Because in open source, you don't have any boss, anyone in the community saying, okay, Telis, you know that you spent 6 months sharing this knowledge with Rodrigo, okay? There is anyone there doing that. So in open source projects, and actually in OpenStack, this kind of thing happening can arise these kind of issues, right? You can have broken docs because, let's say, we implemented something new, but you didn't document it. Fine, OK. You can actually document before implementing it. I've seen that. You can leave that behind. Let's say that you used something to implement some library to implement something very long time ago, and there is this new shiny library that can do something better. But you are the only person that knows how to modify the code because, I don't know, you've put there yourself, and all the people that reviewed or contributed to the same part of the code left as well. I don't know. You can have incomplete features, which I think this one is the most common one. You can start, I don't know, in the OpenStack example, you can write a spec, but not write the code. You can write a spec in the code, but not the docs. It's all kind of similar, right? And when you tie everything together here, you can have bugs. And bugs are actually a tricky one, because if you are the only person familiar with some piece of code, someone else is going to maintain it, right, in the future. And what happens if a bug happens exactly in the area of the code that no one is currently expert in? So what happens is that this new person is going to take a lot of hours to understand the code and to fix the bug that left, right? To give an example, I'm going to talk about this feature here, project tree deletion, that I proposed myself to OpenStack 3 to 4 years ago, I believe. So it's not new. And for those who are not familiar with the project tree deletion or Keystone, for example, in Keystone we have hierarchical projects, right? We have a root project that can have children, and the children can have children, and so forth. And before this spec, any operator, any user that wanted to delete a whole branch of projects would need to delete one by one, starting from the bottom, right? So if you have a big number of projects, it's a kind of cumbersome process. Yeah, OK, I propose it. So is that complete? Is that done? Let's figure this out. So here you can see the spec that I've written myself. There is a problem description, all right? Explain the issue and why do we want to have it. We have the proposed change that is actually the design that we choose to go with it. You can see here you can see the APIs with a cascade in the end. I think it's kind of flag to indicate that we wanted to delete the whole branch. We have some alternatives: security impacts, notification impacts, assignees, myself as the primary one, and some work items. I think in these work items, I tried to capture which step that were required to complete the feature. So we cannot know if the feature is complete or not just looking in the spec, right? So each spec has a blueprint tied to it. So let's look into it. So me again here. And you can actually see that the status is complete. OK. And here in the whiteboard, you can also see the linked reviews tied to this blueprint, meaning that these ones are the changes that we try to make to OpenStack to enable the feature. And at the end, if you see here, in the last cycle in Stein, all of the blueprints in Keystone were transferred to a bug. So there is not the current tracker for this feature. It's this bug. So it's basically the same text with some patches linking to it as well. So you can see that this remove the APIs from doc that is not supported yet. So that's not a very good sign, I believe. I don't know. There's this revert fix cascade operations documentation. So it reverted that fix in the docs. And you can also see some abandoned patches. So what's going on here? We have some reverse, we have some abandoned patches. I think the safer way to know if this is actually implemented is to actually look into the code. So I have it here. Can you see my screen here? It's fine? OK, so let me pull the latest changes. OK, everything up to date. I'm a Keystone core, so I kind of know the ways of the code. So it's going to be directed to the point, but just because I kind of know the code already. So I know that in Keystone, we have actually two modules that separate between the API and the backend. I'm going to first take a look in the backend. So we have here a resource, which is the kind of project is a kind of resource in Keystone. Can I actually, I'm not sure if you remember, but the word that we used to indicate, the flag that we used to indicate if it was a cascade, a tree deletion, it was cascade, right? Just similar to SQL that we have. So if I look to delete project, I find this one, right? Here is looks like to be a private method to delete project. And here we have the cascade, right? So looks like it's here. We also have this block here. If cascade, do something. And here you have the subtree list. Everything looks like it's implemented. OK. So who calls it? So delete project calls it. So here you check if it's a domain, because domains are just a special type of project in Keystone. And it also receives the cascade here. Cool. So backend seems to be in place. What about the API? Yes, Vin remembered when looking into the code before. So here is exactly the delete project API. So believe me, this is the call to that method that I just showed you. And it doesn't seem to pass the cascade, right? So kind of, we have a hint here that it seems to not be implemented in the API, so no one's calling it. What about the actual API doc? Does it have it? So let me look here. Delete project. Oops. Detail. Yeah, we don't have anything for cascade, right? So basically, what is the issue? A long time ago, I've proposed a new feature that had a real use case. I started to implement it, and I don't know, I lost my focus on the feature. I left my position. I changed projects, wherever, and it's not complete, right? And it's actually a good time to talk about this and having this conversation in this summit, because Telis used to be the Sahara PTL, and he's going through a transition right now, and he's going to talk more about these kind of situations that arises in the community and some of the solutions that they may have it.
Thank you, Rodrigo. So I think it's pretty clear what the problem we're trying to solve here is. So there are many cases in open source communities where you find someone holding the knowledge for a whole chunk of code or a whole feature. And if for any reason something happens to that person that she's not able to complete that, most of the time things get lost and you're left with incomplete code, dirty code, something that's there but it's never used, just like the cascade stuff on Rodrigo's example. And we're trying to think of solutions on how we could help avoiding that issue. So the first one that we actually thought about was maybe having a better detailed roadmap of features. So we're talking about the specs, just like the one that Rodrigo showed. we had specs in OpenStack for years now. And they are actually a really good documentation of how the features are going to get implemented. And you can actually see work items, you can see details there of the proposed change. Someone can read it and actually finish it. But there is one thing that the spec doesn't do. If you remember the recipe example, when the cooking person left the room, she left no information on which step of the cooking recipe she was. She was the only one holding that information. And the same thing happens with the specs on OpenStack. The spec's written, but there is no tracking on the spec. Once you read the spec, you have no idea in which step of the implementation that feature is. And also, that's not the only problem. There's also the issue of who owns the spec and who owns the responsibility of keeping that spec up to date if we had a tracking system on that spec. So, for example, Rodrigo wrote the 3 deletion spec, but he's not working full-time on Keystone anymore for about 3 years now, maybe 2 years. And who is supposed to update that spec with the information to where it was stopped? It's not his anymore because he's not working on the project directly anymore. Is it the PTL?
Could be me, right? But
it could, but he didn't do, which is the issue. It could be the PTL. I see some people who are PTL here as well. As a former PTL, I can say definitely not, because there's not enough time to go from each spec to update everything that people did in the past. It's just too much work. And we need a better way to avoid these kind of things from happening. And what we need to do next to avoid that. So let's imagine that you own something really important from the project. You're a PTL of a small project, or you own the knowledge of a whole feature on a bigger project that only you know how that works. If something happens to you, imagine that you are on this situation there, or something less tragic. Maybe you just left the project, just changed focus. Who's going to continue to work on that? And that's the main focus of our conversation today, because we're mostly here to motivate the community to share what they know and to keep information flowing so the projects and the community as a whole can continue growing, even if we're not there anymore. So as an example, I was the Sahara PTL for 2 years. And in those 2 years, the community changed a lot. There were so many people that left OpenStack as a whole, so many people that left the Sahara project as a whole. And for about 1.5 years now, we've been working with only 3 active contributors. But after my first year as a PTL, I came to one of our new contributors and I asked him, at some point in life, do you want to be a PTL? And he told me, yes, that would be interesting for me. I like the idea. And from that point on, I started sharing my information as the knowledge that I had as a PTL with him to avoid losing that if for any case I wouldn't be able to be a PTL anymore in a more abrupt way. So knowledge transfer, that's the point and that's the goal of our conversation today. And there are some ways that we can do that.
There is one thing though. Yeah. You don't have a boss here to tell you to share what you know, right? It's your responsibility to gain the knowledge and then spread it. It's on you, right?
Yeah, in open source, you kind of have to take the action yourself. There's nobody overwatching what you do there. So it's kind of something that we need to work on ourselves to try to do it better every time. So one of the ways that we can do that kind of thing is mentoring. And we just had a really good talk about mentoring just half an hour ago here. And mentoring is really interesting because you get really close to someone and you're able to teach the person from basic to really complex stuff. I've done it before. It's really awesome. OpenStack has really great programs on mentoring, just on Outreach and Google Summer of Code, who gives some money compensation for mentoring, which is always good. But mentoring has some issues as well, because you can't mentor 20 people at a time. It takes time to mentor someone. It's a really awesome experience, but it takes time. It's not something that you can do, for example, if you have 5 or 10 mentees at a time, you're not going to do any other work. You're just going to keep helping them grow in their knowledge base. So there are other ways to transfer this knowledge. And the first one that we thought about it, and it's something that might seem really simple, but we need to work on our documentation. Documentation is key. It's a key for any project to continue growing. And I'm going to ask everybody here a question that you probably have seen this before. Have you ever tried to work on a project, and the first time that you're looking through the documentation of that project, you had like a getting started kind of documentation, and then you tried to make it work with the getting started, and it simply didn't start? Have you seen this before? How frustrating is that?
Yeah, and there is also something, because if the documentation is bad, the person loses interest in contributing, I believe, because it's not everyone that is going to ask you something on IRC, right?
Yep.
Because if something fails, I don't know, a bunch of people is going to just give up instead of going after the issue or asking about an IRC.
Yep, and keeping a good documentation is key, not only for the people who are working on that or people who deploy that kind of project, but also for newcomers. Because the easier the documentation is to read and to actually make that happen in a real world, the more motivating it's going to be for new people to continue working on that project. So if they hit like a bunch of blockers in the middle, right on the get started, that's going to be really frustrating for them to continue working on that project. So we need to have a parity between code quality and documentation quality on open source to make that thing really available for new people to work on and continue growing. So if you ever write a feature, make sure that you actually write the documentation for that feature. So everything it's really up to date. And also, it's not even, you don't only have to write good documentation, you have to keep that up to date as well. So it doesn't matter if you've written a really good documentation for, I don't know, Keystone 5 years ago, and it's really great. It used to work and it was perfect, everything was there. But 5 years is way too long. You need to keep things up to date. So people who are reading that, it's actually a reflection of what the code really does. Another way that we can do a more, less of a formal written information is through blog posts. So blog posts are a little less project specific or kind of feature specific. It's more like a technology information. So on a blog post, you can share, I don't know, maybe the architecture that you use for something, the technology that you use to implement something. And that's kind of interesting because instead of reading a really long documentation to learn something, you can get like some small informations that's just necessary to solve one issue that you have. And I know for a fact that us working on OpenStack, we face different difficulties and problems each day, and we find different solutions to solve that. And writing blog posts on that, it's really interesting because some other people might be facing the same thing, but not knowing how to solve it.
Yeah, a good example that I can say about Keystone, it's Keystone has the federation feature, right? Federation is a bit complicated in the way we're implementing OpenStack, but it's complicated not because our choices, but because SAML and the other protocols. And sometimes it's more useful to, I don't know, share how SAML looks like inside OpenStack instead of telling the step-by-step of how to configure it. It's like I did that. I've done a blog post about how to configure federation in OpenStack a while ago, but I didn't touch the actual knowledge that circumvents the feature, right?
And I guess the last thing that we thought about as a good way for a knowledge transfer is doing exactly what we're doing right now and what so many other people did during this summit is through talks. Small 20 minutes, 30 minutes talks, sharing something that you learned, something that's new, something that's interesting. It's a good way to share this information. You can reach so many more people. In the example here that's being filmed, we can share on YouTube later. People can watch it later, and that can reach so many people in the future. And not only talks on really big events like this. Like you can go to I don't know, maybe a small computer science community that you have close to you and talk about something that you learned, and you can share their information, you can motivate new people to work on open source community through that. And I guess
mentoring is not only about features, code, OpenStack, it's also about leadership. It's also about how to deal with your colleague, how about you write an email for the community to learn, to actually read your email because, right, that kind of stuff is also important too.
Yep, and I guess that closes what we had to talk about today. Those are the things that we actually thought about it in this, and we saw in this last 5 years that we've been working on OpenStack. Those are some issues that we faced, and we just wanted to share that. And we're open, really, we actually ask you guys, what have you seen? What are the things that you've seen and how you solve that? Really interested in see how that works. And if you have questions and suggestions or anything for us, we can go to the mic now. And in the future, you can reach out as Rodrigo de Souza at IRC on Twitter, and Teles Nobrega on Twitter as well. I have the same handle on IRC, and Rodrigo has Rodrigods on IRC. And just to summarize, I guess that's a famous phrase, and your mama was right. It's better to share. So thanks, everyone, and please, thank you.
Yeah, a lot of stuff came to mind with this. One of the things, obviously, like everything you covered is obvious, mentoring and everything. I was thinking about, a lot of people probably aren't familiar, but before we used to do onboarding sessions, Sean Degg started doing these Friday sort of brown bag or they weren't onboarding, they were called bootstrapping hours.
Okay.
And it was recorded on YouTube, and they were just like, how does OSL messaging work? How does RPC and Nova work? How does debugging the gate work? Stuff like that. And it'd be nice if more people started doing that. It's just, I guess nobody's really picked it up or thought about it.
That's actually a good addition to the talk.
Yeah.
Let's go back and...
Oh, okay. Yeah, other stuff, I mean, obviously, like, I totally agree with the documentation stuff. From a core team perspective, a lot of that falls on the core team to say, let's not merge this feature until, because people will write their spec and they'll say, yep, I'm going to add like awesome integration testing and documentation, and then they never do it.
Yep.
And it's a tough balance between people that aren't full-time contributors. So they're just trying to get their thing in, and then you know that they're going to be gone in the next release. So do you try to get it in and then backfill the testing and documentation, or do you play tough and like make them finish it? Or
It's like, sorry.
No, yeah, I'm just working on Nova, like, we've got 10 years of technical debt, so this is like a daily issue.
Yeah, I think that if you had a way to identify where a spec has stopped for some reason, if it was during the spec approval phase or even after it was approved, you had some part of it implemented, but not all, you can give these basic tasks of the spec to new people in the community. Maybe. I think the main issue is when you don't know where it stopped, because you either are going to require someone that has is familiarized with the code, yep, to take a look into it and to find if what's done or not, or I don't know. Yeah, it's.
Yeah. And maybe in this case, I've seen that before on Sahara as well. People come, just write the code that they need to be in and just get out, and there is no documentation, only basic testing. And I guess I know that usually the core team has so many things to do, but one thing that would encourage would be, I don't know, maybe the core team to get really close to that person during the development and try to work alongside them. Say, okay, it's really important to have documentation for this. Let's try to make this together and kind of help them build the documentation instead of just like look at the documentation for an example and write your own. Maybe the core team could help, or some experienced documentation person on the team could help with that. That could be one way of trying to minimize that. But as Rodrigo said, I think the main problem is not knowing what's there and what's not there. Because then you have to, there's no easy way to find that out. So Rodrigo is familiar with the example that he showed, and even he had to take 3 different steps to get into the right place to find the abandoned bugs, the information, because it wasn't a spec, then it was a blueprint, then it wasn't a bug. There's no single point that you can actually find all the information that you need. And that's really complicated for people who are getting into the community and trying to do some work.
As in the cooking example, what happens if someone else tries to implement a new feature that touches the delete project area of the code? They need to go around the feature that is incomplete, right? So this is very bug prone.
And it's just there for nothing because it doesn't do anything yet.
I know from personal experience, I've had to enter into environments where the person coming in to replace has expired. So there's no way to reach them for any questions. And I've discovered, you have to basically become almost like a anthropologist or a forensic investigator. And I think that's probably something missing in a lot of the computer science type thing of a lot of the thinking is forward. It's not you're having to investigate. It's probably an under-investigated topic of, programming anthropology or programming forensics, where you have to decipher everything from the beginning. I know there's been lots of discussions I've seen on Reddit and whatnot, what do you do? And everyone gives advice, find out where they keep the code. Hopefully it's not encrypted. Where are the keys? And it keeps treeing out. So, I think, there's a lot of effort on programmers to start thinking of legacy.
Right.
What happens to all my accounts? You mentioned blog posts. Blog posts disappear.
Right.
Internet Wayback Machine or Internet Archive, maybe will capture it. But, you have to think of posterity, and maybe you have to say, this is my exit plan, and leave it to your family or whatnot, all your credentials, because that will evaporate too. So I think it's really down to the programmer taking the ownership of what is their legacy.
Right. Yep. That's the point, mainly in open source.
And the second thing is I'm facing in my organization retirements. And again, it's like you have to bring in somebody and basically do anthropology on them, and they follow them. What do you do today? What did you do this month? What's happening this calendar year? Maybe you have to do something on a frequent basis to change the code. And you basically have to shadow them until they retire and find out what they're doing. And hopefully that technical writer, that anthropologist person can translate it into the rest of the group too. Because it takes time to get into someone's head.
Yeah.
And I think that's the main point of what we're trying to do here. It's motivating us as developers, as a community, to try to think that way, trying to think that we need to leave something behind, that other people can actually continue and make it work, even though we're not there anymore. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Next question.
So I noticed you both don't work at the same company. How did you find each other and connect to run and talk?
We actually did, right? We've been working at the same company for a long time. Yep. And then 2 years ago, I left Red Hat to join another company. And
actually, it goes way back. We used to study at the same university. Yeah. So then we joined the same company. Now he moved on. I stayed in the same company, but we're still in touch. We still work on some stuff together. So it was not very difficult to get in touch.
Partnership.
So if there are no more questions, there's one more
comment. You were saying as far as like something's personally done and being able to track the work. So like obviously there's some project management tools like Storyboard. Mm-hmm. As far as Nova doesn't use Storyboard, so when I was PTL, I used the blueprints stuff in Launchpad, but because of my OCD, I like very, you know, like I wanted to be on top of knowing what was going on and tracking stuff. And so there's definitely strategies for tracking some of these things. And obviously, like if somebody's got a big long patch series, half of it gets merged, half of it doesn't, and then eventually it's abandoned. Somebody, like you were saying with anthropology, somebody can come along and sort of figure out what were they doing, maybe get it restored and start, you know, cleaning it up and working on it. But so there's ways, but yeah, it's definitely not knowing. For an example in Nova is like we support boot from volume and we support volume back servers, but like not all parts of the API will work if you have a volume back server. So these are obviously like technical debt issues. So when you add a new feature, you have to be like, is this gonna work with volumes? And they'll say, well, I don't care if it works with volumes. It's like, okay, but everybody else that uses these things might care about that. So it's tough.
Yeah.
Yep.
We actually we wrote a blog post trying to share these same ideas of the talk, and we considered like, what if each spec had a very detailed roadmap plan, and each step had a bug linked to it, something like that. We don't know. This is also tougher because it would require someone with more seniority to write the specs, because our more junior person wouldn't know each steps. So yeah, it's an adding process is always like not
two-way street.
Yeah,
It's always good parts and bad parts. Yeah. Yep. And so I think that's all. There's no more questions. Thanks everybody for being here. We appreciate the comments, the questions, and hopefully see you again in the next summit.
yeah. Thank you.
Yep.